Top 10 epic moments when Dana White unleashed his fury. Dana White has unquestionably entrenched his legacy as one of mixed martial arts' most influential people, as the UFC President has played a key role in helping build the sport and establishing it in the mainstream. But White will also always be remembered for being one of MMA's most polarizing figures because of his bombastic persona. After all, you don't typically see the NFL, NBA, or MLB commissioners drop multiple F-bombs in interviews and verbally trash journalists, competitors, or even their league's athletes. But it's because of White's outspoken ways that so many people love him, and it's also why a lot of folks also loathe the controversial promoter. When White sits down for an interview or to talk with the media, the vast majority of people don't turn down the volume and walk away. There's a pretty good chance that something he says is going to make headlines. And depending on your values or views on the UFC's business model, it could make headlines for all the wrong reasons. So, what are the top 10 moments when White unleashed his fury and kicked off a new media cycle? Well, before we get into that, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it and to subscribe to our channel. And after you're done watching this, please feel free to weigh in and share your comments below. Anderson Silva. If you've ever wondered why Anderson Silva has kind of ghosted the UFC since exiting the promotion in 2020, one theory is that the star isn't exactly on the best of terms with White. While White has repeatedly acknowledged that Silva is one of the all-time greats, he hasn't always been so kind while talking about the former champ. One vivid example of this was back in 2010 when Silva faced the Galaxy-class grappler Demian Maia. At the time, Silva was at the peak of his powers and was in the midst of one of the greatest championship runs in MMA history. Well, against Maia, Silva ramped up his showboating, and for stretches of the fight, he didn't seem overly interested in trying to finish the challenger. Some argued that was because Maia was so dangerous on the ground, but the fight was widely blasted by observers and fans. Afterward, White let it fly. "I don't think I've been more embarrassed in the 10 years of being in this business. It's the first I've ever walked out on a main event, given the belt to the guy's manager and told him to put it on him." Cris Cyborg. Cris Cyborg will always be remembered as one of the greatest female fighters of all time, but how things ended with White will always be front and center. Cyborg always appeared to have an easy relationship with Dana. After all, before she joined the UFC, White made headlines and dropped jaws when he said, "Cyborg looked like Wanderlei Silva in a dress." Following Cyborg's devastating loss to Amanda Nunes in 2018, White repeatedly claimed the former champ was ducking a rematch. Cyborg and her team maintained that wasn't the case, and they accused White of bullying the decorated fighter. Ultimately, that all led to Videogate in 2019, whereby it was later revealed her camp had doctored a video to make it look like White had been misrepresenting the situation. That didn't go over too well with the UFC boss man, and Cyborg was released. She is free and clear to go to Bellator or any of these organizations and fight these easy fights that she wants. Done. Done deal. I will literally today have my lawyer draft a letter to her team that she is free and clear to go wherever she wants. We're out of the Cyborg business. Mario Yamasaki. Mario Yamasaki was a regular presence on many UFC cards back in the day, and his tendency to let fights go too long made him the subject of online scorn. Well, in 2018, Yamasaki was on the receiving end of one of White's most famous and vitriolic rants. The veteran ref oversaw a fight between Priscilla Cachoeira and Valentina Shevchenko, which saw the latter batter and bloody the fighter for nearly 2 rounds. If you don't recall the bout, all you need to know is that Shevchenko landed over 200 strikes and Cachoeira landed just 3. So, because Yamasaki didn't stop the fight, Shevchenko finished it with a choke. People around the MMA world were calling for the ref's head. On an appearance of UFC Tonight, the UFC President unleashed on Yamasaki. "I think he's disgusting, and I never want to see him reffing ever again. He makes me sick. That guy has no business reffing fights, and I promise you, you're never going to see him in UFC again." Steve Mazzagatti. Another ref who repeatedly drew the ire of White was Steve Mazzagatti. In fact, still to this day, White occasionally sends a verbal jab Mazzagatti's way. But it was how Mazzagatti stopped a fight between Josh Berkman and John Fitch in 2013, or rather, didn't, which prompted one of White's greatest rants of all time. Following the fight, which saw Berkman choke Fitch unconscious with a guillotine choke, the UFC president blasted Mazzagatti. Does anyone disagree with me that Mazzagatti's a fucking toolbox? I mean, he literally did nothing. Fitch is out cold. And I saw some people talking shit on the internet today like, well, BJ Penn held the choke for 5 more seconds against Jens Pulver and somebody else, I can't remember who it was. Those were rear naked chokes. Greg Jackson and Jon Jones. White often sings the praises of Jon Jones today, but over the years he's had some fiery things to say about the renowned fighter and his longtime coach Greg Jackson. To be fair, when we're talking about Jones, it's not like the star hasn't had his fair share of issues and run-ins with the law. But back in 2012, Jones and Jackson pissed White off big time when they decided to not fight late replacement Chael Sonnen. The brash veteran had been tapped by the UFC to fight Jones after his original opponent, Dan Henderson, had to drop out just days before the card due to injury. Jackson's decision ultimately resulted in UFC 151 getting punted altogether, and White let loose on the renowned coach. Jon Jones was given the options and told the consequences. He knows what happened. Machida was in the air when we were trying to make the fight. I can accept why Machida didn't take the fight. I understand that. Greg Jackson told Jones there's no way you take Chael Sonnen fight on 8 days' notice. Said it would be the biggest mistake of his career. Greg Jackson is a fucking sport killer. I've never heard anything like this in my entire life. Ariel Helwani. Over the years, many media members have come under fire from White, especially commentators and journalists who have had some tough questions for him in the UFC. One of those people has been Ariel Helwani, who White routinely blasts to this day. One of the more notable exchanges took place prior ahead of UFC 232, which was moved from Nevada to California after Jon Jones failed a drug test. Showtime and Steven Espinosa. White and the UFC made truckloads of cash by working with Showtime and Steven Espinosa for the Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor fight, but he and the Showtime executive have traded verbal shots plenty of times. In 2020, White lit up Espinosa after the latter claimed the UFC was going to withdraw pay if fighters criticized the promotion's COVID-19 protocols. That's not true. First of all, there's something in the contract for disparagement. There's a disparagement clause in there that's in all of our contracts. Isn't that creepy little fucker a lawyer? Isn't that creepy little fucking goofball a lawyer? Sherdog.com. Old school fans know that Sherdog.com was one of the first MMA websites that really helped build the sport. But some of the stories the outlet has run over the years didn't sit too well with White, to put it mildly. In fact, one of the story's writer, Loretta Hunt, wrote in 2009 prompted a rant from White which, let's face it, if it happened today, a lot of league execs would be given their walking papers. The story claimed that certain managers and agents had voiced concerns about not getting provided credentials by the UFC at events to be with their fighters backstage. White released a video in which he responded to the story by calling Hunt a bitch, and he also dropped a homophobic slur while referring to the story's anonymous source. Elite XC. Another of White's most discussed and covered outbursts also took place way back in 2008, following Kimbo Slice's super quick loss to Seth Petrozelli. The fight went down under the Elite XC banner, which at the time was another organization attempting to rival the UFC. Slice was supposed to fight UFC veteran Ken Shamrock at the October event, but after incurring a cut while warming up, Elite XC asked Petrozelli to move up into the headliner and he proceeded to bomb out the street fighting star. Afterward, Petrozelli claimed that Elite XC execs had hinted they didn't want him to try taking Slice down, and that they would make it worth his while financially to stand and strike. Well, when that got back to White, he didn't hold back in trashing the promotion. When dirty people go out and do stuff like that, it hurts. Promoters have a bad rap as it is because of the last 100 years of boxing. We actually started to turn that around and we're doing the right things, and then you have these guys coming out and doing shit like that. It hurts us. Oscar De La Hoya. Finally, we arrived to White's beef with boxing great Oscar De La Hoya. And there's no shortage of instances where he's trashed the Golden Boy. One instance in particular where White let it fly was after De La Hoya criticized the UFC's compensation model. White proceeded to pick apart what De La Hoya's company had paid out for its 2018 MMA event, which featured Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz 3. The only reason I'm telling you this is because he's a lying, two-faced, hypocritical sack of shit, and I hate him so much that I love to prove that he's a lying, hypocritical, two-faced piece of shit. I guess we'll start when he started an MMA event. So, there you have it. 10 instances of White unleashing his fury for the right reasons or wrong. Let us know what you think of White's actions and words in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and to subscribe to KO Central MMA.